All right, so this is Gateway API meeting, the last 15 minutes of Gateway API meeting for May 18. And we've been going through cross namespace forwarding. I think we have reached a rough conclusion on or consensus on 5 with the preference not to introduce any kind of false boundaries here due to them potentially creating more confusion than they're worth, but we do want to follow up with SIG API machinery to make sure that this is actually a reasonable concept, and also want to work with the network policy working group to see if there's a way that we can provide more meaningful restrictions here.
Yeah, I would just add a little bit to what Daniel said. If you don't introduce a first-class mechanism to do this, implementations will add second-class mechanisms. Right? They'll either introduce a new type which represents the resource, or they'll use external name, and then the value of tools like Gatekeeper or the admission controls will be mitigated, which is a less desirable outcome. Right? So there's an extension to this kind of confusion point.
Just to clarify, what you're saying is if we don't introduce a way to forward to different namespaces,
people are going to do it anyways.
Okay. I was making sure that was the thing people were going to do anyways, other than, approach 1 through 4. If we don't implement a way to restrict this, implementations will have their own.
They will find a way, and it will be ugly, and they will find N ways to do it.
Jurassic Park.
Yeah, I think the use cases that have been presented are common use cases. So we need to provide like a first-class mechanism to allow users to do this.
Rob, just to be clear on number 5, like we won't block on API machinery because it doesn't seem like in network policy, like there's no, it's like, it's good to talk to them, but it's not like strictly required to kind of move ahead. Sure.
Yeah. I think if they just tell us it's the worst idea in the world, then maybe that's time to reconsider. But I agree that it seems pretty sensible given that it's already possible. Networking is a little unique in Kubernetes in that the namespace boundary is relatively fake and certainly does not matter for network requests outside of network policy.
Network policy is another example of a cross namespace reference.
Yeah.
Itself, right? I mean,
yeah.
There's that.
Yeah.
You might want to add that to the list.
That's a good point. Let me just add a note somewhere. Okay, any last thoughts on this one? I know we have a couple, at least triage on the agenda still.
Hey, Rob, I do have a note. If you don't mind, while you're taking notes there, I think Bowie brought up a good point of we need to be very explicit in the documentation of, hey, when you do this namespace stuff, like, use at your own security risk kind of thing, right? Here's a link to network policy, here's a link to Gatekeeper, and use with caution. So I think we need to be really explicit with that. The second point is, making a namespace as an optional field for service name, I think is really straightforward, right? Because we know service is namespace scoped. But it does get a little fuzzy when we start talking namespace for backend ref, right? Because backend ref, couldn't it be a cluster scoped resource, or do we go ahead and say we just don't allow cluster scoped resources for backend ref?
So if it were a cluster scoped resource and somebody specified namespace, that would just be invalid, right? It's not necessarily.
I don't. Is optional.
Yeah, I think this is like one of those Kubernetes original design baked in to make this distinction between a cluster scope. Like Kubernetes could have chose like a system namespace or something, which actually it does have, but it's going to be hard for us to resolve it. It basically propagates it as a wart to this level.
So would it be documented that if we if you just get rid of namespace here in your example, and we say this is some kind of object, if we say, here's the object kind and the name, then do we expect it to be in the same namespace as the HTTP route? And if it doesn't exist, then would the implementation then need to see if it's a cluster scoped or?
No. I'd say like we would just say no cluster scope for now. And then if the use case comes in, then we should talk to API. This one is actually, we should talk to API machinery because we have to point out the fact that this is not a symmetric. It's kind of this like bump in the API that when you have to reference both. And I'm assuming that the original design of cluster scope assumed like, hey, you're not going to ever be in this situation.
Yeah, I can't think of many cluster scope resources I would want to forward to. Obviously, there's going to be new CRs that I'm unfamiliar with. Yeah, I think it's fine to say that it's just unsupported right now. I can imagine it's a relatively trivial and backwards compatible change to allow it under the right conditions. But for now, since we don't have a compelling use case, I'm fine with just saying that's not a thing that can be done.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, is just some kind of CR, or I was thinking at the cluster scope, just, with multi-cluster support, like could there be a cluster scope resource that disallows, does some kind of policy for forwarding at the cluster level with the, the service import?
You might, although the review for that CR might get pushback. It's like, why is this a cluster scope thing? But
yeah,
maybe, let's accumulate the use cases and then we can.
Yeah,
it seems like a easy thing to add, although I wouldn't make it super easy to do because it's not a very common case I would expect.
no, I agree. Let's punt on it until there's the use case for it. I think we have the use cases for namespace, adding namespace to HTTP route for service name and backend ref.
cool. Makes sense. All right. Any last comments on here? Great. I'll keep on moving then. I've got a few follow-ups on this, and I'll try to take the discussion here and pull it back into GitHub issues. I think the primary one that we've been using to track this is 582, and we can run from there. The other thing I wanted to talk about is our issue triage. There's been a lot of movement on GitHub in the past week, actually. Like if you go back through, these are the issues that have been at least updated in the past week. And so thanks to everyone for keeping track of things there. We don't have enough time to go through all of them. If anyone has issues they want to highlight, this is a great time. Otherwise, I have a couple in mind that we can go through.
Yeah, here, Rob, can you pull up V1 Alpha 2 issues?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is a, let me give you the name of, I think the issue is, 355.
355. I'm just going to. Oh, right. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, so this one is closed. I mean, I think we are close to being done here. So if you scroll down.
Yeah, I think you had a good summary here where all places where a field name is used as a noun, we use a plural value, and everything that is a verb is singular. That seems like an intentional difference here. And I agree with this consensus that the naming makes sense and we should probably document it in implementation guidelines. But I don't think we need to rename this.
Yeah, I think we're waiting for input from Danian. So I think, Danian, if you have any comments right now, or if you can take a look later.
I mean, I think it makes sense if we have an approach right now where what is it? verbs are singular or nouns are plural, then we can stick with that. I'm fine with that.
Okay, so I think then so then I think I'll let Nick know about this, and then we can close this issue after we document it in our somewhere. I think I'm not sure exactly where yet.
Yeah, no, I think this is good for. Or go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Harry, if you have a PR that updates the docs, then just DM me on Slack, and I'll do a review and make sure that it gets reviewed.
Sounds
Cool.
good. Thanks, Daniel.
All right. Let's see. Were there any other issues we should highlight real quickly?
Did we want to move ahead with the proposal to add a KEP process? And did we want to do it in this release or next?
I think if we do it, this is the release, because this is the release we're making so many. I'm anticipating this will be the release of breaking changes. There might be more, but I hope not. So getting these breaking changes well documented, I think is going to be key. I am very open to a KEP process. I think I was the one who suggested it, but I don't want to impose extra process if it is unnecessary. But I'd be open to starting that up.
I'll draft something and file as an issue, or maybe a KEP 0. Should it be a KEP 0?
Yeah, KEP 0. Yeah.
Okay, I'll
Cool.
send something then. It will be extremely light. Like, I don't want to add to this.
Yeah, I think really that at a high level, what I want is most of our features and decisions end up having docs somewhere. And I just want them to eventually end up getting checked into this repository instead of just getting lost as linked from an issue somewhere, and then maybe the doc changes or goes away. I don't know. It's much easier if it's checked into the repo to understand the decision and rationale behind something. So yeah.
Hey, Bowie, ping me if you have a PR for that, because I'm thinking in a couple of weeks I present the optional gateway class stuff, and maybe I could just follow that KEP process for that talk here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I will. I'll throw something. I'll try to throw something together soon.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we simply don't have enough time to get through everything today, but let me just highlight this one last thing here. I'm not sure this person's name, but they found an error in, I think, code that I added to HTTP route. I added the optional controller field to status, and it's optional, but JSON serialization is not omit empty. This is a really trivial thing to fix, but it raises the question of what we want to do for any additional updates to V1 Alpha 1, or if we just want to push forward with V1 Alpha 2 and say this will be fixed in V1 Alpha 2. Probably don't have enough time to discuss it or come to a conclusion on this call, but if you have time to run through this and take a look at your perspective, I would appreciate it. This is the most recent issue, 669.
Yeah, my 2 cents is the bar needs to be really high to add something in V1 Alpha 1, and
yeah,
I just don't see this as being a high enough bar.
I tend to agree with that. Really, we want everyone to be writing controller field anyways. So the omit empty is kind of the optional part, is just kind of, okay, well, you really should write something there anyways. So it's not that completely justifies it. It's a mistake, but I don't know that it's a high enough bar either to port it back.
Yeah, we have a real easy workaround for this, so it's not a blocker
Cool.
for anything. So yeah, no worries.
Cool. Good to know. All right. Well, with that, I think we're done for today. Steve, thanks for volunteering for next week's topic, route delegation. And then Daniel next week, the week after that, you'll be talking about optional gateway classes. So cool. Thanks, everyone. Great feedback today, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks. Bye.
See you.